Welcome to the second annual City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft Selection Show, 2015 edition. Today is the day when we find out the position in which we'll be selecting our draft picks. Along with that, we'll take trips down memory lane and revisit what each team did in 2014 and how they found themselves in its current position. We'll also be discussing little-known fantasy football facts, talking to some of the team owners, and I'll even be throwing a few City and Team Name League trivia questions around throughout the program as well. But before we get this show underway, let's discuss the particulars of the actual draft. The process remains the same. It's a live standard draft format where you'll have 90 seconds to make your selection. The rotation in which we select will snake, meaning if you have the number 1 pick in the first round, you'll have the number 16 pick in the second round. Each team is required to draft 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 defense, and 1 kicker. How you choose to fill the rest of your roster is completely up to you. If you go to NFL.com's fantasy homepage, you'll notice at the top of the screen there's a tab that says Draft Center. This will be where you'll enter on draft day. But be sure you visit prior to that day to make certain your computer has all the necessary installations to run the draft client. If 2014 taught us anything, it's that with 16 teams in the league, every draft pick means more than it ever has. With all the unforeseen suspensions and injuries, free agency played a key part in the success of many teams as well. But the draft is where you lay the foundation for your franchise. It's where you build your team's character. Tonight, all the owners can begin to game plan a bit more accurately once they know where they stand come draft day. So, without further ado, let's send it to our commissioner to find out who'll be first on the clock. With the first pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Ben Salem Wolves. For those who forgot, or for those who may not be aware, while the big boys and girls are contending for a championship in the final weeks of the season, the less fortunate and less skilled teams are also still fighting for a prize, the number 1 overall draft pick. This year's winner, the Ben Salem Wolves, were last in the East and finished 5-8, the second worst record in the league shared amongst 3 other teams. The Wolves had the 14th pick in last year's draft and got a steal when they drafted DeMarco Murray. DeMarco was the best running back in all of fantasy football last season, and he was the 4th most owned player on championship-winning teams. On top of that, the Wolves also drafted Tony Romo, who rounded out the top 10 in fantasy points for quarterbacks and was the hottest quarterback down the stretch of the season. No other quarterback scored more fantasy points than Tony over the final 4 weeks of the year. Statistics show that 73% of owners who select a running back in the first round win a championship. The Los Angeles Dons selected a running back by the name of Adrian Peterson, number 1 overall last year. The year before that, the San Juan La Princesa selected Peterson number 1 as well. Adrian is a record-setting 3-time number 1 draft selection here in the CTN. Here's a question for you. Out of the 7 years of this league's existence, there's only been 1 non-running back selected number 1 overall. Do you know who it was? While you ponder upon that, let's go back up to our commissioner to find out who's selecting at number 2.
With the second pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Austin Ankle Breakers.
The Austin Ankle Breakers are home to our 2014 Coach of the Year. For the past 2 seasons, they found themselves in the same situation, losing in the semifinal round to an East Division team and losing to the eventual loser of the league championship game. This time around, the Ankle Breakers didn't make it into the playoffs by the skin of their teeth. They turned a 5-8 record into a division-winning 8-5 record, having the tiebreaker over the 2013 CTN champions, the Hollywood Scene. Last year, Austin had the 5th pick in the draft, and they selected Chicago Bears running back Matt Forte. Forte went on to have an NFL record-setting season, rushing for over 1,000 yards and bringing in 102 receptions. The only other man to have had 1,000 rushing yards and at least 100 receptions in a season is LaDainian Tomlinson. Good company. Forte also went on to have 20-plus points in 4 consecutive weeks. Still, the Ankle Breakers are plagued by not being able to kick down the door to advance to the championship game. I had a chance to catch up with the owner of the Austin Ankle Breakers and asked her if she felt the Slayerville North Jackets were deserving of a shot at the trophy last season. I also asked if she felt her team would have fared better against the league champion Croydon Cannibals, and this is what she had to say.
To me, it was anyone's game at the end. The last few teams that made it to the playoffs, it was a matter of who had a good game that week and who you decided to put on your bench and who you left out in the game. So I think everyone who made it to the playoffs was worthy opponents, and I don't think it would have been any different. That's just my opinion. I think they were all pretty equal at the end. And for me, it came down to who I benched and who had a good week, who had a bad week.
A very diplomatic response from the Austin Ankle Breakers owner. She's definitely not trying to give opponents any bulletin board material, and that may work in her team's favor by season's end. It would appear the commissioner's ready to make his announcement, so let's send it on down to see who's number 3.
With the 3rd pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the St. Louis Stallions.
One of only 2 teams to not lose back-to-back games all season. We'll discuss that other team later in the program. The St. Louis Stallions had everything but the hardware by the time the season was over. The Stallions had the best record in the league, going 9-3-1, and at no point during the season did they ever not have the best record in the league. The Stallions scored 1,371 points, the most points of any team all season. St. Louis had the Philadelphia Eagles defense, which happened to be the highest scoring defense by season's end. They even had the wherewithal to draft Odell Beckham Jr. in round 15 of last year's draft. Too bad they didn't hold on to him, because he could have made all the difference in the Stallions season. St. Louis held the 6th pick in last year's draft and grabbed Eddie Lacy. Moving 3 spots up this year, the Stallions have an even better chance of grabbing a player the caliber of Lacy, or better. The Stallions took a huge step forward after having the 2nd worst record in the league in 2013. Just like the Austin Ankle Breakers, St. Louis's season came to an end in the semifinal round, but unlike the Ankle Breakers, St. Louis was eliminated by the eventual champions, the Croydon Cannibals, a team they actually defeated in Week 4 of the regular season. I asked the owner of the Stallions what it meant to him to lose to the champion Cannibals, and these were his comments.
Well, we all take L's. I just kind of wish that the L would have came in the season opposed to the playoffs. That would have made a huge difference, because if that would have went down, the Stallions probably be champs, you feel me? But, I'm not too mad about it. It was a great story, a great comeback, considering the season that we had before that, so I'm not too upset about it.
The Stallions have been at the bottom, and they've been very close to the top. And judging by their owner's cool, calm, and collected response, I have a feeling their sights aren't just set on a playoff spot in 2015. The commissioner is ready. Let's see what he has to say.
With the fourth pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Hollywood Scene.
It's almost scary to think what the Hollywood Scene can do with such a high pick. This is the first time in 3 years the Scene have had a pick inside the top 5. There was a huge target on Hollywood's back coming into the season, being the defending league champion and all, but they still put together an 8-5 season before being thoroughly embarrassed by division rival and division winner, the Austin Ankle Breakers, in the first round of the playoffs, to the tune of a 120-38 lopsided demolition. That's inexcusable for any team, but for the Hollywood Scene, that's just unheard of. Not taking anything away from the Ankle Breakers, but everything that could have gone wrong for the Scene in that game did. 10 points for Kaepernick, a combined 4 points from their running backs, and -6 points from the Bengals defense. The highest scoring player on Hollywood's team that day was the kicker, with 11 points. As defending champions, the Scene had the final pick in the first round and the first pick in the second round of last year's draft. And with those picks, they surprisingly selected Dez Bryant and Demaryius Thomas back-to-back. It'll be interesting to see what they do at number 4, but there's no doubt that the Scene is looking to restore their dominance over the league. And as if they needed any good karma, only one other team has won a championship drafting out of the number 4 position. Do you know who that team was? You'll get your answers soon enough. But for now, let's see who will be next on the clock.
With the fifth pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Kalamazoo Bombermen.
The Bombermen of Kalamazoo showed flashes of brilliance in their inaugural season in the CTN. They lost 5 of their first 7 games, but they lost those games by an average of only 5.6 points. Kalamazoo then won 3 games in a row, appearing to hit their stride and make a push for the playoffs, drawing even with the 5-5 record. But the wheels eventually fell off, and they lost their last 3 games by an average of 42.6 points. They had the 15th pick in last year's draft and selected Giovanni Bernard. But it wasn't Kalamazoo's drafting prowess that gave them hope midseason. It was an incredibly one-sided trade that saw the Bombermen send Dallas wide receiver Terrence Williams to the Minneapolis Blazers for Ben Roethlisberger. All Big Ben did was help Kalamazoo score the most points in a single game all season, 158, largely due to Roethlisberger's 60-point Week 8 performance. Remember that one? 522 passing yards and 6 touchdowns. Hey, if you don't remember that, how about what he did in week 9? Yeah, the following week he came back and put up 47 points. Those were just his standout games, but Ben actually averaged a respectable 22 points per game throughout the season. Kalamazoo has a great chance of having a more impactful draft this season, especially if their owner is behind the board and able to make all his team's decisions this year. I just received word the commissioner is ready. Let's see who's selecting at lucky number 6.
With the 6th pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Charlotte Queen Bees.
I introduced this pick as lucky, and let me explain why. 12.6% of fantasy owners won their league out of the 6th draft spot last season. Now, 12.6% might not sound like a lot, but that's actually the highest percentage in 16-team leagues. Good news for the Charlotte Queen Bees. Charlotte had an interesting draft last year. They selected Drew Brees with their number 8th pick, but it's a pick they made in round 9 that was a little bit more intriguing. With the 136th pick, the Queen Bees drafted wide receiver Mike Evans, who ended up having an incredible season for a rookie. Unfortunately, Evans didn't show signs of life until week 6, and Charlotte dropped him by week 4. I'm sure Mike's 124 points over that 9-week span would have helped the Queen Bees surpass a 6-7 record. At times it seemed Charlotte took the field, but their heart wasn't in the game. I think we'll see a more assertive team that'll look to get back on top of the South Division in 2015. The commissioner is now approaching the podium, so let's see who's drafting at number 7.
With the 7th pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Los Angeles Dons.
The Los Angeles Dons had gone from the worst team in the league a couple seasons ago to the second worst team in the league last year. But they increased their win total by 3 wins. You gotta have a little sympathy for the Dons. I mean, come on, they had the first pick in last season's draft and wasn't able to assume sole control over their pick. The powers that be decided to choose Adrian Peterson for the Dons, which, if you told any of us this last season, we'd say he made out pretty well. Unfortunately, you know how that turned out for Peterson, and you can only imagine how that turned out for Los Angeles. The Dons had to switch, no pun intended, gears, and they hit the waiver wire. In week 4, they found Tampa Bay rookie wide receiver Mike Evans. Funny enough, that same week they played the team that released Evans, the Charlotte Queen Bees, and beat them 69-63. That was their first win of the season. LA started out 1 for their first 7, but then reeled off 4 straight victories, beating the eventual league champion Croydon Cannibals, defending league champions Hollywood Scene, the Lebanon Pioneers, and South Division winners the Carolina Kingdom Beats, in that order. Let's hope the Los Angeles Dons owner has more say in which direction his team goes when it comes to their draft picks this season. Earlier, we talked about Ben Roethlisberger's great individual performance in Week 8. In all but one season of this league's existence, a quarterback has had the best player performance of the year. Can you tell me what non-quarterback won that award back in 2012? At the midway point of the selection show, all the answers will be revealed. Until then, let's go back to the podium.
With the 8th pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, The Chi-Town Crushers.
While the Los Angeles Dons might have had the most disappointing draft pick last season for a player who wasn't on the field, the Chi-Town Crushers had to have had the most disappointing draft pick for a player who was on the field. With the second pick in last year's draft, the Crushers selected LeSean McCoy. McCoy finished the season 12th in points by a running back, the worst numbers we've seen from LeSean since he's been a starter. He never exceeded 19 points in a game for the entire season. You want to know who finished with more points than McCoy last year? How about C.J. Anderson, Jeremy Hill, Lamar Miller, and Justin Forsett, none of which were drafted prior to the 6th round. The Crushers came in second place in the Central Division and were swept by the division-winning St. Louis Stallions. One loss came in the regular season, while the other loss came in the first round of the playoffs. This is the second consecutive year Chi-Town has been one and done in the postseason. There's going to be some serious competition in the Central Division this year, and it's going to be fun to see how one team pulls out ahead of the rest of the pack. We're halfway through the second annual City and Team Name Draft Selection Show. And now it's time to have a little fun and go back and look at some of the trivia questions that were asked earlier on. Question number 1. Who was the only non-running back to be selected first overall in the 7 years of this league? If you guessed Michael Vick, you'd be wrong. If you guessed Peyton Manning, that wouldn't be a bad guess, but you'd still be wrong. The answer is Aaron Rodgers. The Hollywood scene had the number 1 pick in 2012, and they selected Rodgers with their first overall pick. Ironically, the number 2 pick was held by CTN alumni, the Green Bay Packer-backers, and they selected Arian Foster. The Packer-backers also went on to win the league championship that season. Our next question was which non-quarterback had the best player performance at season's end? In other words, whose weekly performance was so good that no other player could top it all year? Was it Adrian Peterson? It sure wasn't. How about LaDainian Tomlinson? Believe it or not, nope. The only player to outperform a quarterback at the end of a year was Pocket Hercules, aka Muscle Hamster, Doug Martin. In 2012, the Rock Hill Billies took a chance on the rookie Doug Martin in the 5th round. Doug had a monster season, and the high point of the year for him was a 51-point game where he rushed for 251 yards and scored 4 touchdowns against the Oakland Raiders. Martin's record-setting season is largely overlooked because the same year another historical feat was reached. Adrian Peterson became only the 7th player to rush for over 2,000 yards in a season. The Trenton Typhoid Terror greatly benefited from Peterson's work as they drafted him 9th overall in the first round of that year. And for our final question, which is the only team to win a championship selecting from the number 4 draft position? Was it the Warsaw Warriors? Well, they were a good team during their time here, but the answer is no. They never won a championship here in the CTN. Was it the Jacksonville Mac Attack? Yes, they were an actual team, and as we know, anything attached to Jacksonville is just doomed, so I think we know the answer to that question. It was not them. If you guessed the Croydon Cannibals, ding ding ding, you win the best short-term memory award. Come on folks, it was just last season. Besides the number 4 pick, other championship winners have selected 9th, 7th, 2nd, and 12th. The 4th pick is the luckiest here in this league because it's the only pick to have 2 championships linked to it. But we'll get more into that later on. Our quiz segment has been a blast. I'll always believe that in order to know where we're going, it's important to know where we've been. So let these teams and players of the past motivate and inspire you to etch your name in the history books. And maybe you'll become an answer to a question one day yourself. Now, back to our regularly scheduled program. The commissioner is waiting.
With the 9th pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Carolina Kingdom Beats.
While the Kingdom Beats might lack a championship, they most certainly don't lack confidence. Carolina came into their first year putting everyone on notice. But unfortunately for the Kingdom Beats, not everyone was listening. Carolina made it to the playoffs and faced a team they'd called out all season long, the Croydon Cannibals. The game was ugly, and much like the Jim Harbaugh Jim Schwartz handshake, the post-game was even uglier. But while the Cannibals went on to a championship, the Kingdom Beats went back to the drawing board. Last season, the Kingdom Beats had the 11th pick in the draft, and they selected Calvin Johnson. They followed that up with a round 2 selection of Andrew Luck. On paper, that sounds like 2 home runs. But Carolina and Baltimore teamed up to make the trade of the year, exchanging superstars for superstars. Carolina gave up Luck and Megatron for Brandon Marshall and Peyton Manning. Marshall had moderate success, while Peyton Manning averaged 23 points per game all the way up until the fantasy playoffs began. Once we hit the postseason, Manning's production dropped drastically, scoring only 2 points in the fantasy wildcard round. To add insult to injury, Blake Bortles, Sean Hill, Kyle Orton, Derek Carr, Terry Bridgewater, and Geno Smith all scored more points than Peyton Manning during his fantasy playoff run. Carolina had a rocky start to their season, but when things got going, they ended up having the longest winning streak of the year with 7 straight victories. But then things went downhill again when they dropped their last 4. I tried to get word with Carolina's owner about their identity, or lack thereof, but unfortunately they couldn't be reached for comment. Coincidence or intentional snub? Either way, it might not be Carolina's style to show up for interviews, but if they want to win this year, they better show up for the games. Let's head back down to our commissioner.
With the 10th pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Baltimore Brokers.
And speaking of the other half of that trade of the year, the Baltimore Brokers enter their 3rd season of competition with hopes of regaining the success of their rookie campaign when they were on the losing end of a championship appearance. Baltimore had the 10th pick in last year's draft and selected Peyton Manning. But as we already discussed, Manning and their 2nd round pick Brandon Marshall got shipped to Carolina for Calvin Johnson and Andrew Luck. Johnson came out of the gate hot in week 1, but 4 of the next 7 weeks he spent sidelined with an injury. For the remainder of the season, Calvin looked a little more like Megatron, putting up some big numbers at times. But over the last 7 weeks of the season, he averaged only 12 points per game. Andrew Luck, on the other hand, played lights out for the Brokers all season long. Ben Roethlisberger might have put up some impressive numbers this year, but Andrew Luck effortlessly put up 25 points per game from week 1 to the season's end. It's fair to say that Baltimore got the best of this huge trade, although both the Brokers and Kingdom Beats couldn't make it out of the first round of the playoffs. In the first 2 weeks of the season, Baltimore defeated the Croydon Cannibals and the Slayerville North Jackets consecutively. Baltimore even won the division, having the tiebreaker and head-to-head win over the Cannibals with an 8-5 record. When Baltimore met Slayerville for a second time, with a whole lot more on the line, mind you, the Brokers failed to recreate that magic from week 2, and they got sent back to the crab cake capital of the world. I asked the owner of the Brokers if his division win felt tainted, considering the championship game was represented by two other teams from the same division. Both he owned victories over. And this is what he had to say.
No, I wouldn't say at all that winning the division is now tainted, because there was two other teams from the division who ended up in the championship game, and one of them walked away with the championship title. So I wouldn't say that at all. If anything, it's motivational. We do look at that as should have been us, could be us, and will be us. And had we not suffered from the injury bug going down the stretch of the season into the first round, it would be us. So that's the way that the boys are taking it. We look forward to this upcoming season and anything that comes along with it. Next question.
A very positive outlook from Baltimore's owner, and he seems very eager to get his team back out on the field. The commissioner is waiting for us, so let's send it back down to the podium.
With the 11th pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Guthrie Gorilla Family.
This year, we say goodbye to San Juan and hello to Oklahoma. The Guthrie Gorilla Family is the only addition to the league this year, and while they may be new to the CTN, they're grizzled veterans when it comes to the fantasy game. Not since the inception of this league has a team won a championship in their inaugural season, but teams like the Baltimore Brokers and the Slayerville North Jackets have come pretty close. I'm sure Guthrie would love to improve upon the strides Baltimore and Slayerville have made, specifically bringing home the hardware should they be fortunate enough to reach the championship game in their rookie year. We don't know much about this team yet, but it'll be exciting to see exactly what they bring to this league. Back to the commissioner we go as this selection show moves along.
With the 12th pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Slayerville North Jackets.
Last season, the North Jackets drafted 3rd overall, and they greatly benefited from that as they made it all the way to the championship game in their rookie season, despite coming in 3rd place in the East Division and despite having an up and down inconsistent year. Slayerville didn't put together back-to-back wins until week 11, but from week 10 on, the North Jackets hit their stride, a stride where only 20 points separated them from being called the best team in the league. With their 3rd pick, Slayerville selected Jamal Charles, who paid dividends for the majority of the season, but didn't have any positive impact when the team needed him the most, scoring only 4 points in the biggest game of the year. The biggest acquisition for the North Jackets was the Week 5 edition of Odell Beckham Jr. Odell missed the first 5 games of the season, but averaged 16 points per game for the final 11, specifically putting up 19 points in the first round of the playoffs, 30 points in the second round of the playoffs, and 26 in the league championship game. Odell Beckham appeared on 40.5% of championship-winning rosters, the most of any player in 2014. The unfortunate thing about Slayerville's loss is the amount of points that were left on the board. Phillip Rivers threw 3 interceptions, Jamal Charles fumbled, and Cody Parkey missed 2 field goals. That's 14 points right there. Then you add in the fact that despite having good games, Latavius Murray and Harry Douglas couldn't find the end zone. Their tight end Jordan Reed only registered 5 yards. Now there's no guaranteeing Slayerville could have won the championship last year, but with the removal of certain key mistakes, a game that was already a thriller could have been even more of a nail-biter in the end. The East Division is stacked, and it's going to be so exciting to see who rises to the top in 2015. Let's move along and see who will be selecting next in the City and Team Name Fantasy League Draft.
With the 13th pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft. The Minneapolis Blazers.
While teams like the Baltimore Brokers and the Slayerville North Jackets dispel any myths that rookies can't come in and make an immediate impact, the Minneapolis Blazers represent the majority of fresh-faced teams that struggle in their new surroundings. It took Minneapolis 6 weeks to get their first victory, a victory against the league champion Croydon Cannibals at that, longer than any other team in the league. To make matters worse, the fantasy football gods toyed with the Blazers, having 2 of their games end in ties before they could even see their first W. Minneapolis had the 9th pick in last year's draft, and in true fantasy football fashion, they selected rival Green Bay Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers. Not a bad pick at all, considering Rodgers has finished no less than second among quarterbacks in fantasy football points in 5 of the last 6 years. The year he wasn't among the top 2 is the year he suffered a broken collarbone. The Blazers were involved in quite a few trades last season, and even more trade talks, some more beneficial than others. It'll be very interesting to see how savvy Minneapolis has become in their second season. It will be great to see them win, and then stay winning, over the course of the entire season. We're getting down to the wire. Let's see who the commissioner is announcing for pick number 14.
With the 14th pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft. The Lebanon Pioneers.
The Pioneers added 2 more wins to their season, going 5-8 this time around, but still found themselves coming in last place in their division. As opposed to last year, their poor record didn't have to do with ill-advised decision-making from their owner. Well, actually, maybe a little bit of it did. I mean, the Pioneers had the Panthers defense, and if they gave me -4 points the way they did Lebanon in week 3, I would have cut them immediately. But they kept them around and started them again in week 4, and the Panthers topped that performance by giving them -5 points that week. Sadly, that wouldn't be the last time the Pioneers had a negative scoring defense. In week 8, the Colts defense gave them -1 point in what was one of the worst games in the history of this league, a 153-53 100-point loss to the St. Louis Stallions. Lebanon got off to a 2-game win streak, but then lost 8 of their next 9 games. Way before Patriots versus Colts, the Pioneers had their own Deflategate because the air was let out of their balls very early in the season. I'll tell you what, in all fairness, instead of listening to my version of the Pioneers' bleak history, let's hear it straight from their owner's mouth himself.
Well, that first season I didn't really give it what I should have. My head wasn't really on straight, and I never really applied the focus I needed to. Last year I was in a much better place, but for some reason it just didn't click. I won those first 2 games by crazy circumstances, and I think I used up all my luck by week 3. So whether it was my defense putting up negative points 2 weeks in a row or players on the bench outscoring the starters, I think I had a decent draft, but that doesn't always translate to wins. So I think a lot of it just comes down to better luck and maybe not overthinking my roster each week. I talked myself out of starting the right guy a time or 2, so I think I just need to learn to listen to my gut, and hopefully things will fall into place from there.
With the 7th pick in last year's draft, Lebanon selected Monty Ball, and in week 7, the Pioneers traded away Cam Newton straight up for Matthew Stafford. Every great story has a tragedy to triumph type of plot. We've seen the tragedy these last 2 years. Could this be the year of triumph for the Pioneers? only time will tell. Until then, let's go down to the stage and see who's next on the clock.
With the 15th pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Palm Beach Elitists.
Palm Beach improved from a 4-9 record in 2013 to a 5-7-1 record in 2014. Sometimes you gotta take small steps to reach the top, right? Last year they held the 13th pick and selected Russell Wilson, whose ability as a dual threat has him putting up better fantasy numbers than Michael Vick in his prime, and his fantasy numbers have only increased with each of his last 3 seasons. Sadly, Palm Beach's draft day highlights end there. Reggie Bush split carries and spent quite a few weeks on the sideline. Wes Welker never hit his stride, and by the time he started putting up some numbers, he was a member of the Croydon Cannibals roster. And Trent Richardson is being discussed as one of the biggest NFL busts ever. Enough said there. The list goes on with guys who showed up one week, and the following week you'd forget they were even on the team. In order for the elitists to look elite, they need elite players to play elite on Sundays. For a city whose motto is the best of everything, it's time they started living up to that claim. 2015 needs to be the year Palm Beach steps out of the shadows and lets the league know they're for real. Now there's only one pick left, and I can't wait to talk about this team. So let's not delay this any longer. Mr. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
With the 16th pick in the 2015 City and Team Name Fantasy Football Draft, the Croydon Cannibals.
Last but certainly not least, it's our 2015 City and Team Name League champions, the Croydon Cannibals. The Cannibals are that team you just love to hate because they look you dead in the eye and they tell you what they're gonna do. Not in a braggadocious type of way, but in a relaxed, self-assured demeanor. And then they actually go out and execute. 7 years ago, the Croydon Cannibals, then known as the Trenton Typhoid Terror, won the inaugural City and Team Name League Championship. In 2011, the Typhoid Terror reached the championship game again, but came up 13 points shy to the Seattle Sharks. After moving the franchise to Croydon in 2013, it would only take 1 year for the owner to reestablish his team as one of the prime-time players in the league by defeating the Slayerville North Jackets and becoming only the second 2-time City and Team Name League champion. There's a lot of significance to the Cannibals championship win. For one, the last time Croydon wore the crown, they had the number 4 draft pick. That year they drafted Frank Gore. This past year, Croydon once again had the number 4 draft pick and they selected Marshawn Lynch. In 2011, when Croydon lost the championship game, their starting quarterback was Cam Newton. Last year, when Croydon won the championship game, their starting quarterback was Cam Newton. In 2011, the Cannibals' receiving corps was led by Denver Broncos wide receiver Demaryius Thomas. In 2014, Croydon's receiving corps was led by Denver Broncos wide receiver Emmanuel Sanders. While we're on the topic of Sanders, most owners didn't draft him until the 8th round. The Cannibals selected him in the 5th. Emmanuel had the 6th most fantasy points for all wide receivers last year. Keeping with the wide receiver theme, in 2011, the Cannibals paired Cam Newton with his number 1 target Steve Smith. In 2014, the Cannibals paired Cam Newton with his new number 1 target at wide receiver, Kelvin Benjamin. While other owners gave up early on stud rookie wideouts like Mike Evans and Odell Beckham Jr., Croydon had the wherewithal and patience to stick with Benjamin throughout the year until he paid dividends, and pay them he did. Let's not overlook the key trades the Cannibals made as well, swapping second-round pick Matthew Stafford for the Lebanon Pioneers' Cam Newton, and shipping Steven Jackson and Brian Quick off to Minneapolis for Cam's true number one target, Greg Olsen, a man who put up the best numbers of his career and was fourth in fantasy points at tight end. Croydon hustled all season long, from the draft to the trades to the waiver wire, and most definitely when it came to victories. Consistency was the key all year for the Cannibals. They, along with the St. Louis Stallions, the team with the best record in the league, were one of the only teams to not lose consecutive games all season. There were no early season or mid-season win streaks. Their win streak came when it counted, finishing the year with 4 consecutive wins on their way to hoisting the trophy when the 2014 season closed. Were the Cannibals one of the most dominant teams in the CTN? No. Were they putting up ridiculous amounts of points every week? No. Were they cerebral assassins that lulled their opponents into thinking they weren't superior before reaching into their chests, grabbing their hearts, lifting it up in the air, and proclaiming victory was theirs? Possibly. But who am I to say? I only report what I see. But I can only imagine the Cannibals owner is more than ready to rise from his throne and kick the competition off of the mountain that he proudly sits atop. There's never been a repeat champion in the CTN, but there's a first time for everything, right? Well, folks, that about wraps it up for another year of the City and Team Named Draft Selection Show. And what an amazing show it was. First, I want to thank all of you that took the time to watch this, and I definitely want to thank everybody who contributed to make this as great as it was. I work hard to make sure we have the absolute best league of all, and I share all of this with you guys, so thank you. And I really appreciate you guys for helping to keep this league fun and interactive. However, I will say that while I brought back a few teams that didn't necessarily go out of their way to participate in the group, I'll definitely be cutting ties with teams that do that this year. So if you really enjoy this experience, and you really enjoy being a part of this league, please bring something to the table. That's not too much to ask, right? And here's what most of you have been waiting for. On Saturday, August 29th, at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, our draft will go live. We all know how important it is to be present for your draft. You don't want to be that guy or girl who ends up having to claw your way out of the auto draft basement and be left with the task of turning water into wine. So make sure you get there. Make sure you get there early. And make sure you test out the draft client beforehand, like I said in the beginning of the video. Team logos. There's still a few of you out there without them. If you need help uploading one, feel free to refer to the instruction video I've created on the page, or you can ask any of the other 13 teams who have them. I want to congratulate everyone on the season they had last year and for the draft picks they've received. Get ready for another incredible chapter to be written in this riveting book we call Fantasy Football. Thank you all again, and have a good night.